Good Tuesday evening, everybody. It's 8 o'clock. It's time for our nightly overview of the Atlantic Basin and what's going on with the hurricane season out there. Things are very quiet this evening, even though we are moving into the heart of hurricane season. Usually there's a storm or two or three, or sometimes I've seen 4 active named storms out there at one time, several times over my career. But this evening it's different. We have one fizzling tropical storm in the North Atlantic, and otherwise we're not watching any other really active spots. However, things can change very quickly this time of the year. Now, speaking of the time of the year, I want to begin with looking back. When we look back at typical formation areas for tropical systems early in the season, June, July, this is where they usually develop. And actually, if you think about it, let's see, we had Andrea form here. Barry went into Mexico here, Chantal, then Dexter on the heels of Chantal. So the first 4 tropical storms, and these were little piddly storms, but look where they formed, all very close to or within the yellow shaded area, which is where statistically we see the most activity early in the season. That's June and the first part of July. And then as we got deeper into the season, we got into August. This is where we usually see the activity. The whole basin opens up. And if you'll remember, Erin formed here and then got north of the islands and cranked into a Category 5 right in here, and then took a very classic course to the north, missed Bermuda, and off into the North Atlantic. Erin went, missing everything, which was great because at one point winds were up at 165 miles an hour. That's when it was north of Puerto Rico. So Puerto Rico was able to dodge that one, which is good. But you can see when we get into August and September, you can see the long track hurricanes coming off the west coast of Africa. They can quite often form in the Western Caribbean. I'll show you in a minute the water here. There's tons of energy sitting right there. Gulf of Mexico's ripe, and the entire East Coast is active, especially when cold fronts start pushing off. And we're seeing that now. I'm going to show you that, the upper level wind flow, which is interesting right now as well. So when we look at the storms we've had so far, we mentioned Andrea, Barry, Chantal, Dexter, all forming in that area we'd expect them to. We got into August, we got Cat 5 Erin, and now we also have Fernand, but Fernand is just a piddly little system up in the North Atlantic. The shipping lanes are having to dodge it, and that's about it with Fernand. So far, so good. NOAA and the Colorado State University folks are both predicting about 16 names by the end of the season. Again, that would take us to Pablo if we get to 16 named storms. We've got a long way to go if we're going to get there. We're in the heart of hurricane season. So here we are, August 26th. We're right in this spot where statistically we get most of the development. An entire season happens right now through the middle of September into the end of September. And then it is always interested me, we've got a secondary peak here going into October, and that really is a function of cold fronts beginning to push off the East Coast and into the Gulf. And those fronts, quite often you can get low pressure and tropical systems will form in the warm water off the East Coast when the fronts start pushing off. That's why we have that secondary peak in there. Again, this is from Colorado State. They're forecasting 16 total named storms above the normal of 14, which would take us to Pablo. The dust. So dust has been a factor in keeping storm count, I think, down, and also some of these storms weak. So a little bit more about the Saharan dust. And this is the Sahara Desert. This is where that dust comes from. And this time of the year, you get these monsoon winds which come in from the north at the surface, and they're also coming off the Atlantic, coming in from the south. And right here, you'll get convergence at the surface, and that causes thunderstorms to form. You'll get these storm complexes that form, and then they track to the west. And as they track to the west, they'll produce tremendous downburst winds, like when we have big thunderstorms here, like little derechos, and that will pick up, blow the dust, a tremendous amount of dust up into the atmosphere. And that's the dust that ends up out in the Atlantic that does several things on the planet. One of the things it does is a sinking dry layer, so it limits the amount of tropical activity. And then it also provides nutrients for plant life because there's a tremendous amount of phosphorus in it as well, which helps to replenish the Amazon rainforest. It travels all the way across the globe. So once again, you get these big storms, outflow boundaries pick up the dust, gets blown out into the open Atlantic, and even now we've got a plume coming out. But as we look at the forecast for this last plume, this next plume coming off, we go into early next week, it really thins out. So really going into next week, we don't see a whole lot of dust influencing here, but I do want you to show that, look at the track of this particular plume, look at how much of it ends up in South America. It dumps phosphorus into the Amazon rainforest. If it weren't for that phosphorus coming from the dirt in the Sahara Desert being blown up and being deposited here, the Amazon rainforest would run out of nutrients for all the plants to grow. They'd run out of phosphorus because all the rain they get here leaches the phosphorus out of the soil. If it's not replenished, the Amazon rainforest doesn't happen, but it does because of that feature in the Saharan Desert that blows the dust up, that settles a lot of it over the Amazon basin. And it also settles across the United States as well from time to time. We get it and we see it here from time to time. Very nutritious and necessary for plant life. So here we are going into Wednesday, August 27th. There's a little bit of dust coming into the Atlantic and Caribbean basin, and there's that dust plume that lasts. You see the outlook going all the way into September 2nd. Not a whole lot of dust. Here's the current mapping of storm systems out in the open Atlantic. First thing I always look at, nothing developing in the Caribbean, nothing developing in the Gulf of Mexico, so nothing right on the front burner here for Houston and Southeast Texas. Then we look further out, there's a tropical wave here showing zero signs of development, not expected to develop. This is what's left of Fernand. Now, I say what's left, it's still, is it still? Here's the 4 p.m. update. They still got 40 mile an hour wind on that. So it's hanging in there as a minimal tropical storm. Pressures have come way up to 1,007 millibars. So this one is in the process of losing its tropical characteristics. It is forecast to lose its tropical characteristics as it heads to the North Atlantic, staying well south of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, and really not much of a weather maker for the islands up here either. So things are very quiet here as we are in the, statistically, the meat of hurricane season. Looking at the surface isobars, looking for potential development. We'll run the models here. I want to point this out. That is Fernand, right there. You see the two small closed areas of low pressure. The black is the Euro, the red is the GFS, the Euro and the American model. And so that's what a developing or a system would look like. That's what will look like when we run this model forward. And that is what you will notice, and let's just do this really slowly. We go into Wednesday, Thursday, let's go into Friday. That is what you don't see here. That's not a closed low, that's just part of a broad center of a broad area of actually high pressure sitting here. Look at all these long, straight flowing lines. Don't see anything kinking off. That is just a daytime little area of low pressure over the island of Hispaniola, not a developing system at all. So no closed lows developing. We'll run this model out through Saturday, Sunday, and again, just as quiet as you'll ever see it into the heart of hurricane season. So for the moment, things are asleep. Again, even though the models say that, things can change overnight. So again, our duty is to watch the weather once a day. That's the price of living in Houston and on the Gulf Coast. Once again, ocean heat content, and the first thing I see is looking here, you saw that this is an active area, Western Caribbean. Statistically, we get a lot of development here in August and September. It is because quite often you'll get a tremendous amount of ocean heat content build up in the Western Caribbean this time of year. It hasn't been tapped yet. There have been no big storms through here, so it's just sitting here. Doesn't mean we're going to get a storm, but if one were to move into this area, it would have abundant energy to feed off of. And again, I left the track of Aaron up. This was Aaron who became a Cat 5 right in here. And look at the scar as it literally sucked out the energy from the ocean. It sucked out and used the ocean heat content as it was a powerful major hurricane moving through here. That's a great example of how these storms can, under the right conditions, feed off of ocean heat content. Ocean heat content is a combination of sea surface temperature and how deep does that warm water go. It's a true measure of how much energy is in the shallow surface waters, so that that's available for a storm to feed off of. Again, there's the very high ocean heat content, Western Caribbean. Nothing over the top, but plenty available in the Gulf of Mexico right now as well. Sea surface temperature. So this is just surface temperature, just what's on the skin of the ocean. Main development region, we'll outline it right here. That's the MDR. So even out here toward the Cape Verde Islands, it's borderline. 81 there, 79, 82, 81. Really anything above 79 to 80 is enough warmth to get even a major hurricane going. But sea surface temperatures out here are not super hot. And just north of that, they drop below that 80-degree threshold. Closer to the Leeward and Windward Islands, you get into the mid-80s, which is very warm, plenty warm. And then the sea surface temperature, where we have all that ocean heat content, 87, but the warm water is much deeper here than it is in the Gulf. We're at 87, but you notice we don't have quite as much ocean heat content. The warm water doesn't go quite as deep right now in the Gulf of Mexico, but plenty of warm water waiting. Will we get a storm to feed on it? We don't know. We'll take it one day at a time. Now, continental United States, upper level winds. This is the flow at 34,000 feet. This is something when you do hurricane forecasting, outlooking, you have to look at. This is a major component in where storms will go if they were to develop. And right now, see that big trough dips down into southern Georgia and then up off the east coast. So as far as hurricanes are concerned, that is like a blocker just pushing you down the line. If a storm were to come in, it would most likely get caught up in that flow and turn out to sea. That's why you see those historical tracks coming to the west and turning, because this time of the year, August, September, we start getting these east coast troughs. And we've got a big one here right now. So that would be a sort of a safety mechanism to steer everything away from the U.S. if something were to form now. So what is it going to look like moving forward in time? Well, through the end of this week, we continue with this blocking trough off the east coast. So were something to form, it would likely be turned away from the United States. If something forms in the Gulf right now, can you guess which way it's going to go? That's a ridge of high pressure. The flow is clockwise. If something were to form right here under these conditions, it would most likely be pushed southwest into Tampico, Mexico. But we don't have anything there right now. But that's why we look at this. You can tell if something were to form, where would it go? That's going into Friday. I wanted to show you this. This is very interesting, not only for hurricane outlook going into next week, but also the continental U.S. So you'll see we stay with this trough dipping all the way down to Florida. So it deepens and then comes up the east coast. So that really, anything out here that forms is going to get blocked and turned away from the United States. But as far as our weather is concerned, it's going to make the United States, especially the eastern 2/3, much cooler than normal. And I want to run this again. I'll just show you what I'm looking at here. This is a cross-polar flow. What you've got is a flow. There's a high here. See the flow coming out of Siberia across the Bering Strait into Alaska, and the flow down into the continental United States. So that opens the door for cold air to come down into the eastern 2/3 of the U.S. Will we end up getting some of that towards September 4th and 5th? It's too far out to tell. It's going to be close, but it's something we're watching. What this has done is brought some record low temperatures the past day or two, and will continue again tomorrow for the eastern half of the country. They'll have lows tomorrow in Atlanta in the 50s. Very, very extremely rare for August to get that cool. Okay, that is where we stand with the tropical update and the flow at the upper level across North America and the Northern Hemisphere. Our next live update on KHOU 11 News at 10 o'clock. We'll see you then.